Hello, ruffians, and welcome to Playing Rough, the gaming podcast that combines humor, tryharding, and still having friends. I'm your host, David Conrad, and with me, as always, is
John Mincer.
Hi, John.
Hey, David. How's it going?
It's going. I am very tired.
Yeah.
It's been a long few weeks for me. It's really funny because when we recorded last time, it was the one day that I was in Indianapolis over like a 2-week period.
Yeah.
And so I'm like a little burnt out. Apparently to the point where I had you and Ben terrified.
Well, so just in the week between our last recording and tonight, which we recorded on Thursday last week, and again we're recording on Thursday, we have not been able to get a hold of Dave. So we were kind of worried that, I don't know, you had gone nuts, maybe?
I mean,
gone nuts, maybe?
I mean, it's always a distinct possibility.
And we hadn't seen any, like, real bad news out of Indianapolis.
So just kind of like fingers crossed. But no, I am just tired. I'm feeling a bit rejuvenated now after kind of getting back in the swing of things, being in Indianapolis again for a couple of days. It was a lot of travel. I am a homebody.
Yeah.
And so
I totally get it. I mean, we had the most chill Labor Day that we could think of, right? Like, we had a 3-day weekend. We visited Becky's grandparents. We played some games. We bought some new games, which I'll be talking about a little bit in the What Are You Playing? And we just really recharged, and I really needed it. This was a tough week. Next week is going to be even tougher. We won't be able to record on Thursday, so I'll talk to you about that after recording.
Mm-hmm.
But I need the energy. I need the time at home, and I definitely feel you.
Yeah. So the night, like, we spent Labor Day weekend helping Caitlin's parents move their stuff out of their not at their basement, their lower level of their house. Mm-hmm. When it was constructed, the builders took a lot of shortcuts that are unfortunately now having to be addressed. So we helped them empty the lower floor, and they've got their walls are torn out right now as they're trying to fix up these things that were messed up in the first place, and it's nuts. But the nice thing was, since I was in Fort Wayne with Adam, I actually got a chance to play quite a few games. So I'm excited for once I get to be like, I didn't just play Duel Links.
I know, me too. Actually, I did continue with a couple of my campaigns, but I've also tried some new stuff this week, and I'm really excited to talk about it.
How about you run through your stuff first, and then I'll talk about mine.
You got it. All right. So we went down to our friendly local game store, and we had a really nice time there. So I guess now might be the time to tell everybody. What do you think?
I mean, if you are ready, I'm super excited about this.
Okay, cool. So my wife is pregnant now.
Yay!
I know. And she's pregnant with twins. So
I'm still processing that.
So we're going through all of the stuff where doctor's appointments and getting the house ready and everything, but she wanted to take a walk, but right now, because it's twins, she's on some fairly decent restrictions. Like, she gets tired quicker, she gets sort of nauseous quicker, and we are doing what we can to make sure that she gets exercise and food while still dealing with the fact that her body is changing in ways that are different and in some ways unexpected. So yes. We went down to our friendly local game store. We walked around for a while. We investigated a whole bunch of games and Campy Creatures, which are both wonderful games. Just a real quick overview of each. I'll probably end up talking about them in a little more detail later because I'm really enjoying them. Cat Lady is a game about the core loop is that there are 9 cards in front of you. You are trying to collect cats, you're trying to feed those cats, and you're trying to play with and otherwise entertain those cats. And so all of the cards behave a little bit differently. Toys are kind of a hand-building mechanic. Cats will give you victory points, but only if you can feed them. If you can't feed them, then they just get discarded. So it ends up being a game about trying to balance what you're doing and maximizing what you can get out of your pick of 3 cards every turn. So had a really, really nice time with that. That's a really fun game. Campy Creatures is kind of it's a bidding game, so it reminds me of a nice time with that. That's a really fun game. Campy Creatures is kind of it's a bidding game. So it reminds me a little bit of like Love Letter, in that you're sort of trying to guess what your opponents are going to be doing. You've got cards that go from 1 to 8, and you're trying to capture cards that are on the field. So you play your hand down until you've played 8 cards. There are also a few powers that force you to discard or whatever, but basically you play your hand out until you have nothing left, each round trying to get something on the field that you want. So because you have a card that's a 1 and you have a card that's an 8 and your opponent has a card that's a 1 and a card that's an 8, you have to sort of decide, how am I going to make the best out of knowing that somewhere in this hand of cards I'm going to have to lose a few bit secondary power. So you end up with some very interesting clashes of powers and clashes of people picking the same card or very different cards, trying to manipulate what's going on the field. So really cool game. Really enjoy it. And then I have also finally had a chance to play a couple of solo games of Stellar Leap. Stellar Leap reminds me a little bit of like a Catan mixed with a 4X game. There you try to get 4 different resources. Those resources power the actions you can do, and it's sort of an efficiency-based game where you're trying to pursue your species' own secret goal as well as public goals and get the most possible victory points. So I'm really enjoying it. I don't have a lot to say about the strategy yet, but hopefully I will pretty soon. Really enjoying these games. Really looking forward to getting Heroes Crossing out on the table, probably on Sunday. So that's where I'm at in board gaming. In terms of video games, I have continued to play Sunless Skies after the new update. It is really good. I finally run into some of the new enemies they've added, some of the new storylines they've added. Every time they do an update, they do content update plus mechanics, and this time around, the mechanics are great. Combat is like twice as deep, and I know there's a few more things coming. There's large weapons that haven't been added yet, but they've added like ramming behaviors. They've added a little bit more clarity to the combat. So really, really good. And then some of the new stories are very interesting lore-wise. So that's good. Also playing a little bit of Fallout 4. I finally got it modded to the point where I like it. And that's right about the point where I'm like, all right, time to do something new, you know? So
isn't this like 3 weeks in of you being like, I'm trying to mod Fallout 4?
It is, yeah. Because I keep changing stuff. I did the same thing with Skyrim. Games that are that moddable, I really like to play with. I keep changing stuff. I did the same thing with Skyrim. Games that are that moddable, I really like to play with and see if I can add depth to them, you know, that kind of thing. I don't really do the coding myself. I'm talking about using mods that I find online. But I don't often mod other types of games. So like I'm really excited about Tropico 6, which will be coming out soon. I know that people are interested in modding it, but that kind of game, which is like very balanced, I'm not super interested in modding because of the way the core loop works, right? Like big open world games are much more interesting to mod to me than other types, you know, city builders.
Well, it just feels like there's more that you can add without changing how the game works itself.
Right, and the things that you can change subsystems in the game. So like changing the alchemy system is one thing, whereas, you know, putting in a whole different road system, I don't know if I would really love that. So in a whole different road system, I don't know if I would really love that. So, you know. How about you? What have you been up to?
So, like I said, I actually got a chance to play quite a few different things. So, Adam and Caitlin and I all played a couple rounds of the Super Mario Power-Up game again. It was still just as funny as it was before, so I'm really excited that held up. I wasn't 100% sure how it would do the second time going through, but it was still just as much fun. Jump Drive is still is such a good game. I really am enjoying playing that. Me and Adam played a couple, just the two of us. Caitlin jumped in for a game or two as well. Amusingly, we had one game where like I was convinced Caitlin was running away with it, and she did kick my butt, beat me by like 15 points. But then on the last round, Adam went from being a little bit behind Caitlin to like 20 points ahead of her.
Yeah,
it was
sometimes
crazy.
Games that you can do that in, I'm always very impressed by. But the first time I play and it happens to me, I'm also like, oh man, I didn't know that I could have just sandbagged until the last round. You know, that kind of thing.
In that game, since some of the cards can give you so many victory points, you really can get super swingy turns. Like you can build yourself up to set yourself up for one of the like 9-cost expansions, and when you drop it, all of a sudden it's just like, well, I earned 20 extra victory points this round. So I love the speed that game plays. I love the swinginess a bit. It's such a great game. Like I kept using it as like a palate cleanser after me and Adam had played like 3 rounds of really grueling Commander. So then, I mean, that was another thing we played. We got to play some Commander. I love. So I've got Marin in a pretty good place where I'm pretty happy with her. The only other things I would want are like $200 some cards that I'm obviously not going to get.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm pretty happy with where Marin's at. But every time I play against Adam, he is tinkering. He is tinkering still with his mono blue deck. And it was really fun because he had one commander in for his blue deck on a Friday night, Baral, and he couldn't win a game. So on Saturday, he swapped Baral out for Jace Friend's Prodigy, and he's like, Baral's on a timeout, let's try out Jace. And he beat me 3 times in a row.
Wow.
And then the next day, he kept Jace in, and then I won 3 times in a row. I think it goes...
swingy, huh?
Yeah. Well, because both of those decks play towards infinite combo kills. Okay. So, I mean, if you draw the right cards in a 100-card singleton deck, sometimes you just go off.
Yeah, sure. Right.
I played a little bit of Smash Up with Adam too. We played 1 round of it with some of the new expansions that I've gotten, which was nice to actually get to crack those open and play. And then over the weekend, I played a bunch of Skyrim. It's really funny.
It's a totally different experience, and sometimes a better one, sometimes a way weirder one. I think anybody who says, "Oh, Bethesda's so lazy, they don't, QA test their games, rather. Modders have to fix everything." Have they never played a mod? Mods are entirely amateur work, right? A lot of the people are actually programmers and are actually, graphic designers, or their art assets come from, a place of really serious work, but they don't play perfect with the game ever. And they're always buggy. Every mod I've ever played has some bugs in it. Modders don't fix the game. They add crazy new experiences to it, and they are wonderful, but you got to know kind of what you want.
Well, it's funny because like the bugs that pop up in Bethesda games, like there's just so many competing systems in the games. It just makes sense sometimes they're just gonna like rub each other wrong.
Exactly.
Well, it's funny because like the bugs that pop up in Bethesda games, like there's just so many competing systems in the games. It just makes sense sometimes they're just gonna like rub each other wrong.
Exactly.
So and like I'm really happy playing through my version of Skyrim right now. This character is really just kind of dabbling in everything, so I've still staved off doing the final Thieves quest because I can't yet. I'm not in the right mindset to go do 1,000 different missions for Drevin.
Sure.
So I finished the companion quests. I've now married Ayala,
yes.
Which is it's really funny because I'm playing as like a female wood elf. Like having a wood elf marry a Nord is just always makes me laugh. And then currently I'm in the College of Winterhold trying to get the Elder Scroll because I'm kind of doing the main quest, but I keep getting distracted by doing College of Winterhold quests. Every single fight I just like start off by summoning a Flame Atronach and then I go hide with my bow and shoot things.
That is one of my favorite ways to play that game.
So I've been having fun with that. I'm also like tinkering and smithing and enchanting a little bit. Like this character's like just dabbling in everything, and it's hilarious.
What a great way to play, though. It's a really fun. It's people who do get tired of games like that, I understand. Core loops and everything eventually do get boring. But there are so many new systems that I think people forget are even in the game. They're like, oh, I really like playing as a two-handed, and it's just like totally different playing sword and board. So.
Yeah, I'm actually this character for the first time. I'm actually using sword and shield as their backup. I've never used the blocking mechanics in the game, and they're really interesting.
Especially as you start adding stuff to your block skill, like being able to, shield bash and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
God, I love shield bashing so much. But yeah, so
that's pretty cool.
God, I love shield bashing so much. But yeah, so yeah, it's been interesting because like the very first character I ever made was a dual wielding character. Then I made a bow hunter. Then I made a mage character, and now this character's kind of dabbling into everything. But I'm like also experiencing new things for the first time, and I'm like. I'm doing the main quest, but I really am kind of also putting it off because I don't want to kill Parthenax, and I don't have a choice.
Yeah, that's right. I have the mod that fixes that, but I don't
can't on the Switch.
Yeah. Right.
So besides that, I've played a little bit of Magic Arena. I've done a couple of quick drafts for Dominaria because I freaking love that format. It's so much fun. I can't stop drafting black though. It's a problem. I have a condition, John, where every time I see a strong black card, I take it, regardless of if I'm in other colors.
Yeah, it's called Black Draft.
Yeah, I have Black Draft.
Yep.
But the other thing that I got to play this weekend is actually the game that we're going to be talking about tonight. I played 3 solo games of Clank, and I'm so pumped to finally be talking about this game.
What a segue. Here we are. Clank.
Sometimes it works.
Yeah, it sure does. Tell me about it.
Okay. So Clank is a game designed by Paul Dennen. It's under Renegade Game Studios and Direwolf. I always want to say Direwolf Digital, but Direwolf Digital is their digital brand of Direwolf. Yes. And what's great is it's actually kind of a game about burglary, where you have a group of dungeon divers attempting to steal as much as possible from a dragon's hoard in a dungeon.
Yeah.
Which is a really kind of like. It's attempting to steal as much as possible from a dragon's hoard in a dungeon.
Yeah.
Which is a really kind of like it feels both similar and different simultaneously to like a Dungeons and Dragons experience where like we're gonna go raid the dungeon, but here like you're trying to avoid combat as much as possible and just steal everything that's not nailed down.
Sure. You know, it reminds me a little bit of the Hobbit, right? Where Bilbo he has to steal from Smaug, but he has to steal. He can't stop Smaug or anything.
Right, like he doesn't stand a chance, and like you can never actually fight the dragon.
Sure.
So the goal, like I said, is delving into the depths of this dungeon. You need to secure an artifact, and then you have to escape before the dragon can kill you.
Cool.
The game is a really interesting fusion of a deck building game and a traditional board game because you use cards that you're acquiring as if it were a deck building game to move around a physical game board where you can find, hidden secrets and the artifacts that are necessary to finish the game. To move around a physical game board where you can find, hidden secrets and the artifacts that are necessary to finish the game.
Okay.
Which is a really cool take, kind of like fusing these two together. I mean, it might exist before this. It probably has existed in some form or another, but I haven't encountered it before.
Right. How neat.
There are 2 levels of kind of escaping once you have your artifact, and it depends on where you are on the board and if you fall to the dragon before you escape. So the board is divided into 2 parts. The only named part of it is the depths, which is the bottom half of the board. There's like a line that runs through the center of it, and if you make it past that line, you're in the depths, and if you're above that, you're in the dungeon, but you're not in the depths.
Got it.
If you die while you're in the depths, you get no points at the end of the game. You're just dead. It's like, sorry, the dragon killed you and probably ate you. If you make it up to the top half of the dungeon, you just got knocked out.
Yeah, got it.
You get to count up all the points that you have currently when they rescued you, but you don't get the full bonus of escaping the dungeon, where if you do that, you get an additional 20 victory points. And if you're playing a multiplayer game, you speed up how often the dragon attacks after one person escapes.
Okay.
So it kind of like pushes the game towards its ending.
Sure.
The namesake mechanic of the game involves using Clank tokens, which is where Clank comes from. And they're little cubes. And what you do is you'll just put them into a pile up in the top right corner of the game board. And then there'll be like cards you play that'll say like get +1 Clank, +2 Clank, whatever. And so you have like a little pile of cubes and you'll add them up into this corner. Now, what you're going to do from there is when the dragon attacks, what's going to happen is the dragon. what you're going to do from there is when the dragon attacks, what's going to happen is the dragon has a bag, and inside of that bag is 20 black cubes. So before the dragon ever attacks, you take all of the cubes that you've been putting up on the board and place them in the bag as well. You then are going to like shake it up, mix it up really well, and then pull out a differing number of cubes based on what the dragon's rage level is at.
Okay.
The dragon's rage increases every time you steal an artifact, or if you find a minor secret that happens to be one of its dragon eggs, or if you're playing the solo game, there's a couple times where it'll increase on its own. But each time the rage increases, the number of cubes you're pulling out of the bag increases.
Okay, yeah.
So when you pull out the cubes, if they're black cubes, they just get off to the side. You dodge getting hurt. But if you pull out a colored cube, whoever's cube that is, adds it to their health tracker.
Okay.
And if you ever get to 10 damage, you're knocked out. And like I said, if you're in the depths, you're just dead.
Sure.
So, and I know that I feel like I'm all over the place, but there's so many little moving parts to this game, which I'll get into why that's a good and bad thing later. But now that we've talked about kind of the board and how the dragon attacks, the deck building aspect of this, right? Mm-hmm. So as you're building the deck, there are 3 main resources and kind of a couple of side resources. So cards are going to give you skill, attack, or agility. The skill allows you to purchase new cards. It's kind of themed as you're stealing items with your skill. The attack allows you to fight monsters, or when you're moving through the board, it prevents you from taking damage if you move through a space that has a monster symbol. And then with the agility, that allows you to actually move through the board. It takes 1 agility to move 1 space on the board. Then there's like a couple places that require 2 agility to move through it. There's places where but the idea is just that is how you move about the board going further into the depths.
Got it.
You're also going to earn money while you're playing, and each gold is worth 1 victory point, but you can also use it to purchase items at the market, which is a couple of specific places on the board. You can buy a crown, which is just worth additional victory points. It costs 7 to buy anything from the market. Crowns are worth 10 victory points, 9 victory points, or 8 victory points. So you're just trading up in victory points.
Sure.
And there's also a couple of cards in the deck that'll be like, get this if you have a crown.
Okay.
But the other 2 are have special rules with them. One is a key, and it allows you to go through lock symbols on the board. So usually you can't pass through those little locks because it's like there's a locked door in the way. But the key, which is themed as a skeleton key, allows you to pass through those objects. And usually you'll have easier access to some secrets and some of the stronger artifacts if you can go through the locked doors.
Sure.
And then the backpack allows you to hold an extra artifact. With the artifacts, you get 1, and once you pick it up, you can't drop it and pick up another. It is yours, and it's attached to you.
Sure.
The backpack allows you to hold an additional 1, though. There are only 2 backpacks in the game. There are only 2 backpacks in the game, so it's generally unlikely that one person will get more than 1, and if you're playing with 3 or more people, some people won't have any. But that's what the idea of what the backpacks are, is trying to just let you get extra victory points, because the artifacts are worth anywhere from 5 to 30 victory points and numerals of 5s.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm following.
So there's also health items that will keep you healed up. There's additional ways to move, such as like teleporting from room to room, which will let you bypass the bad things that are happening. And there's other small bonuses. But basically, at the end of the game, whoever has robbed the dungeon of the most goods is the one who's going to win. What's nice is on the board, the front and back are both different board setups, so you can kind of play through each different ones. So each time is going to be slightly different based on, so like that's kind of the basics of the game. And again, I know it sounds like a lot, and I'll hit some more on that as we go.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, but I think the game sounds in a lot of ways fairly straightforward.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It reminded me a lot of when we played Scythe, where like it took us 2 hours to learn all the rules for the game, but once you got into it, it felt very natural.
Yeah, all right. So, there is a lot going on. Which parts do you find the most fun?
So I really enjoy how they managed to combine 2 separate game types into one thing that, like I said, feels very fluid. Um, Moving about the board feels very nice. Getting to interact with things makes you feel like you're actually in the dungeon. And it's just cool to have movement be something that matters in a deck building game. Because usually with deck building games, you're just ruffling through a deck as quickly as you can, trying to find your combos and play this stuff out. And I really enjoy those types of games. No knocks against them, but it's interesting to have a deck building game where my movement and positioning also matters in a sense.
Right. Yeah, and actually that's a really neat fusion of two things you wouldn't necessarily think would fuse.
Yeah, like I wouldn't sit down and naturally think I want a movement-based board to go along with this dungeon crawling deck builder that I'm making. But adding these two together and flavoring it as they did, really I think brings the whole like package together.
Rad. So, what is frustrating about a game like this then?
So, I feel like I kind of actually hit this a little bit while I was explaining, just that sometimes it feels like too many things are going on at once, despite a very good attempt to keep things from being overly complex. I think that they did a good job of the cards that are included in the base. I think that they did a good job of the cards that are included in the base game. And I'm just talking about the base game here because I haven't played any of the expansions. But I think they did a good job of the base game keeping the effects very simple. And I think that's important because stuff gets crazy really, really fast. Like, you need to be able to move, you need to be able to purchase cards, and sometimes you're going to need to be able to attack all on the same turn.
Yeah.
And when you can't, it sort of feels like you're stranded with cards that do nothing. So, like, say you really wanted to purchase something that costs 3 skill and move 2 spaces while fighting 1 monster in a turn. Mm-hmm. Well, if you have 2 skill, 1 agility, and no attack, it's like, well, I can't do anything I wanted to this turn.
I see.
I also think that, again, and this is for the base game, I've heard that they did address this a bit in one of the expansions, that there needs to be more ways to remove cards from your deck. There's very few ways to kind of trash cards, so you get stuck with really underpowered cards most of the game.
I see.
Including there's 2 cards in the base deck which just add Clank to your thing. They give you no bonuses. They're called Stumble, and you're just making noise.
Oh man.
And so, like, when you get into the late game and you really need to draw a powerful card, and that card shows up because you haven't flipped a single card into the dungeon row that can trash a card in your hand, that can be really kind of frustrating.
Right. Yeah, it does seem like most of these deck builder games have some mechanism for making sure that you can kind of keep up with the power creep, but yeah. All right. So it sounds like, you've got a deck builder, you've got a whole bunch of other things operating. What strategies should I take to be competitive at this game?
So I think that it's important that you have slight access to each of the 3 main resources. I think that attack can be the main resources. I think that attack can be the one that you let slide the most, but you really want to build your deck towards being good at one of the 3 in particular. I found that, like, if I want to go for a really heavy victory point theme without having to worry about digging into like the powerful artifacts, like the 30 costs and stuff, you can focus really heavily on skill and try and purchase cards that are worth a lot of victory points on their own. There's gems and diamonds and stuff that you can buy from the deck that cost a lot of skill to purchase, and all they do in your deck is draw you a card, but they're worth a bunch of victory points at the end of the game.
Okay.
There's also 3 cards that you always have access to. One gives you 2 movement and a skill. One gives you 2 attack and a skill. And one gives you it just gives you 7 victory points at the end of the game and has 0 text on it. So that card, you need to make sure that you have an escape route plan and probably don't want to go too far into the depths.
Sure. Makes sense.
If you choose to focus on movement, on your agility, you can be the person who tries to delve all the way to get the most expensive artifact. And if you're lucky, maybe grab some money and try and get a backpack to get 2. Because you have the highest chance of getting deep into the depths and then still escaping if, like, each turn you're moving 3 spaces or whatever.
Sure.
This can cause the things where you, like, really want to purchase something and don't have the skill to do it, or you have to take damage to move past some monsters. So you have to keep that in mind as you're delving. But if you give yourself a lot of movement ability, you can toy around with grabbing things more. There's a group of things that are like monkey idol tokens that you're more likely to be able to get. You can probably pick up more of the secrets. You're just running the risk of self if you don't draw the right things at the right time.
Yep.
And then finally with attacking is almost always good. There's a base monster you can always fight. It's a goblin. You spend 2 attack on, you get a gold when you defeat it. The
Cool.
dungeon row also will have monsters flip up on occasion, and they're usually worth extra gold, or one of them forces other players to add Clank to the board, so it's one of the few ways to directly affect other players. And so getting high attack can be really good for getting extra gold, but again, since you don't have movement, you can't delve super deeply, and you also run the risk that monsters just don't show up for you to fight.
Yeah.
You always have access to the goblin, which is nice, but 2 attack for 1 gold is not a good rate. It's more like you want to sink your excess attack into that, and you want to be fighting some of the stronger monsters. And if they aren't getting flipped up, I think it hurts the attack more than it does anything else. But by the same token, if a bunch of monsters are coming up and you're the only one who can fight them, you can get those bonuses.
Okay.
And I think that once you have decided on which one you want to do, figuring out your route through the maze is really important. Like I said, there are certain areas that you're just cut off from if you don't have a skeleton key. But there's also spaces on the map where you can only move one direction. And if you move yourself into a corner thinking that you're going to grab a certain artifact and then get away, and you don't realize that the route you were planning to escape is a one way to where you're at, you can leave yourself in a really dangerous spot where it's going to take you twice as long to escape, and you're more likely to die to the dragon.
Okay.
So you really have to be paying attention to where you're going and what your escape route is at almost the whole time.
Makes sense. Cool. So it sounds like there's pretty much three main strategies for tackling the game as a whole, and then just make sure you pay attention to your route as well. Of the 3 resource-based strategies, which is your favorite?
I really enjoy going for the skills, because if you have high skill, you can purchase the more exciting cards. You can get the draw 2s and 3s. You can get one of my favorite cards is he's a wizard that just gives you 2 skill, but he's worth 2 additional victory points for every one of those secret tomes that I talked about. They're just worth 7 victory points. That's in your deck at the end of the game.
Wow.
So he makes those things that are worth 7 victory points worth 9 victory points each.
I can see that being a big bump.
Yeah, and there's also, like I mentioned, there's the gems and the stuff like that, but there's one in particular that's like the Dragon's Eye, where if you die in the depths or in the top of the dungeon, it's worth 0 victory points, but if you escape, it gives you an additional 10 victory points. So it turns that 20-point bonus to a 30-point, 10 victory points. So it turns that 20-point bonus to a 30-point bonus. So if you can accrue the skill and buy these expensive cards, it's a lot of fun, and like I said, it tends to lead to having big decks that you're shuffling through quickly, so it's like everything I love. So I really enjoy going for these high skill, but I've found that I like each of the different strategies made. I've tried tackling it in each different thing, where I focus on agility or I focus on attack, and it's really, each one of them plays in a fun and interesting way.
Yeah. So you touched on this just a little bit, but what are some of the major risks and rewards of focusing on attack or movement or skill?
Well, the biggest risk you can run in this game, since movement it plays such an important role, is getting yourself trapped in the dungeon. And I've done this once or twice, where I have delved in the wrong direction and I thought I had an escape route and it turned out that I didn't, or I did
I've seen it happen a couple times.
So making sure you know the route is really important. I can't really stress it enough, because it's one of those things that if you aren't paying close attention to it, you can really get yourself trapped. I feel like more experienced players probably don't run into this a lot, but I want to hit it for anybody who is thinking of trying this game or has maybe only played once. If you aren't routing yourself, it can really come back to bite you in the butt. And then for each of the different things that you're focusing on, if you focus on just skill, it leaves you really vulnerable because you aren't typically buying stuff to fight. You aren't buying a lot of stuff that can make you move. Thankfully, there's a couple of good movement-based options that give you a good amount of skill, and so those end up going to the deck pretty easily. But if you don't find those cards, you can be moving at a snail's pace through the dungeon. So if you end up going to the deck pretty easily, but if you don't find those cards, you can be moving at a snail's pace through the dungeon. So if you end up with a bunch of those dead victory point cards and no way to get back out of the dungeon, you can die in the depths really easily as a skill-based person and get no points at all.
Yikes.
If you focus on attack, it can really leave you unable to move around. A lot of the attack cards don't have movement-based bonuses, so you have to make sure that you've got a couple to get yourself around. Otherwise, you can end up in a space where it's like, well, I've got 6 attack for this turn, but I can't move anywhere and I can't buy anything.
Yeah.
And again, if you don't flip up monsters to keep fighting, you're in trouble. Because some of the monsters will give you movement or give you skill to help you purchase and move. So if those aren't showing up, your attack-focused strategy can really kind of go to crap. And you could just end up with a bunch of gold that, escape from the dungeon, you're not likely to win the game if somebody does.
Right. Makes sense.
And then finally, if you focus on agility, it can leave you light on the resources to acquire cards as you're moving about. And it can leave you with the lightest amount of victory points really easily because you're pushing through the dungeon quickly. You get to, say you decide I'm going to get a bunch of agility. I'm going to go for the 30 cost artifact, which is the most expensive one. And that's good. And you get the 30 and then you escape. But then you look through your deck and you realize my deck is only worth, 10 victory points because I focused so heavily on moving and I got out so fast.
Right.
So you really do need to dabble in kind of all the resources. You can't completely neglect one. I think attack is probably the one you can neglect the most, but then you're going to take a lot of damage because you can't move through the monster spaces then without taking damage. So if you are generating Clank and you're taking damage on your own, you can again get killed really quickly.
Right.
So it does tend to help, but I do think that you get the biggest rewards by focusing on one or the other.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me. Cool. So given how you've described this game, I'm not really sure. Are there land destruction type strategies?
So this game has a similar problem to another game that I'll probably talk about at some point called Ascension. And both of them have this issue where if you choose a strategy and then those cards don't show up in the center row of purchase or fight, you can kind of be hated out of the game by the game itself rather than being outplayed by your opponents.
Oh, okay.
There is a good amount of variance and stuff that's going to flip up. And this game is balanced really well where I don't encounter this often. But I played a solo game where I decided to focus on attack because I got a couple of good attack options early. And then I did not see a single monster show up in the dungeon row the entire time.
Oh my gosh.
It's highly unlikely that it'll happen, but it is a possibility.
Yeah.
Ascension has this worse. If you look at unlikely that it'll happen, but it is a possibility.
Yeah.
Ascension has this worse. If you look at just their base game, they again have gotten better over time as expansions and balancing and all that stuff. But if it's that issue you have of competing resources, where when you've got this many resources to focus on, if the right things don't show up, you can end up with a bunch of extra resources that aren't doing something.
Sure. Makes sense to me. Oh, cool. So who are good people to play the game with? Casual people? More competitive?
So I actually feel that this is one of those few games that feels fun for the whole spectrum of players.
Nice.
More casual players, it can get slightly too complex. And for more competitive players, there might be a little bit too much randomness. But overall, it does a good job of actually kind of balancing out fun that anyone is looking for. Like, if you can plan out a strategy and execute it as a competitive player, that feels great. Mm-hmm. If you are just like, I'm picking up these cards that look cool and I'm cruising through this dungeon fighting monsters, as a casual player, that also feels really good. And the game feels rewarding regardless of the type of player that you are. I think it probably does have that sense where you want to play with people who are of a similar competitive level as you're trying to play it at. Because I think that if you were playing it casually against a competitive player, that could be frustrating.
Absolutely.
But also not a lot of interaction across the board a ton of times to where like somebody who's being hyper competitive can like ruin somebody else's time.
Right.
As long as that person doesn't care about, losing and they just want to have fun playing through the game.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Cool. Do you find this game replayable so far?
So I'm actually in a weird place with this. So the game actually doesn't have that many cards. At least in the base game. It's like,
okay.
I think I was able to sleeve it up with less than 200 sleeves for the cards.
Oh,
and that's
right.
across starting deck, the dungeon row, and all of the cards that you just always have access to buy.
Yeah.
It's actually a really small amount for a deck builder.
Mm-hmm.
The game's really well balanced and a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed running through it because you're still seeing cards in a different order, and what you choose to focus on is different. But when I see that small of an amount of cards, I would then expect to look to expansions to build on that, right?
Right.
Well, Clank has done this weird thing where so there are 2 expansions for Clank, and then there's a different version of Clank called Clank in Space. The 2 expansions for Clank can't be played together. You pick one of the 2 expansions and combine it with the base game.
Oh.
And then Clank in Space can't be combined with the base game at all.
So it's almost like they've over-engineered it for balance.
Adventures and you're fighting different stuff. So like one of the Clank expansions is is Egyptian themed, so there's like mummies and tombs and things like that. One of the expansion is like sunken treasure themed, but like you can't have sunken treasure mummies. And then Clank in Space, I know there was kind of an uproar from people when it first came out that it literally just does not work across with the base game or its expansions at all. And in fact, they've now released an expansion for Clank in Space called Clank in Space Apocalypse.
Okay.
And the game is good, and I really, really enjoyed the base game. I bet I would enjoy the expansions played with it, but I do think that the idea to limit how you can combine the expansions and to kind of take away player agency a little bit in that, I think that's a little harmful to the replayability, personally. Because, like, when you talk about Arkham Horror, you talk about, we combine these in different ways to really play with this and see what we want to do personally. Because, like, when you talk about Arkham Horror, you talk about, we combine these in different ways to really play with this and see what we want to do and all this stuff, but you can't do that with Clank. You have to, like, combine them in a specific way and do it one at a time. And to me, that also means, like, separating it out at the end each time, which can be frustrating. And I think I get what they were going for. I like the idea of it being like, this is Clank, but you're doing a different like adventure. So we don't want, for cards that care about the sunken treasures theme stuff to interfere with the cards that care about the mummy theme stuff.
Okay.
But I think the fact that the base game being as small as it is means that, like, at the same time, you're only revealing 6 cards for the dungeon row ever at once. Cards only replace themselves when you purchase or fight one of them, so you don't tear through the deck quickly.
Right.
It's interesting. I have a lot of torn feelings quickly.
Right.
It's interesting. I have a lot of torn feelings about how the replayability works for Clank.
Okay, got it. So, complex replayability.
Yes.
Cool. How was the presentation? Do you like the cards? I know you said you sleeved them. I know you also sleeve a lot of cards. Is that something that I should do?
So, I think the cards look really good. I think that they shuffle together just fine without sleeving them. I just really enjoy sleeving, and it also makes me feel like my cards will last longer.
Yeah.
So I tend to just do it with most of the games that I really enjoy and plan to play a lot. Clank looks good. It's got a fun, sillier art style that isn't like... It's not like Munchkin levels of silly, but it's... I don't know. It's very cartoony,
irreverent
in the sense, but it's not like, like I said, like it's not comic cartoony. It's just like it looks cool. It's got yeah.
Sweet. Do you see this more as a brewery or a marathon game?
So this is interesting because I feel like playing this game solo feels more of a brewery game length, whereas playing it with multiple people feels more of a marathon game length.
That's interesting.
And what's really cool, and I haven't talked about this on, so I'll kind of get into it here. The solo mode for Clank cannot be played out of the box. They don't have one in box for a way for you to play it solo.
Okay.
But Renegade Studios has an app that works across all of the board games that they have that gives you different modes for the games. And for Clank, one of those is a solo playthrough.
Interesting.
And what it does is it actually gives you side quests to complete on given turns. If you complete the side quest, you get a small bonus. If you fail the side quest, you get a small negative at the end of the turns that it's giving you to do it.
Right.
And it's really fun, and it gives you a way to keep track of your scoring. And what's cool is do it.
Right.
And it's really fun, and it gives you a way to keep track of your scoring. And what's cool is that it actually does track everything that you've done. So I can go into the app, and I can see how many treasures I've stolen, which kinds of the treasures. I can see how many times I've survived, how many times I've died. It breaks it out and gives you some really cool, fun stats for it. And it was funny because my first time that I did it, I was like, oh, this was such a high score. I won't do this again. And I subsequently beat that score the next 2 times I played it. To the point where in the game that I'm going to talk about for my best story, I actually got overly greedy trying to beat that score again.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us that story then?
So, with the solo mode, like I said, you have these side quests. It's a lot of fun to kind of work at this. And I had, over the course of the first 3 times I'd played this by myself, worked at getting slightly higher scores. And I had a highest score I had gotten.
Right.
So I got kind of cocky.
Okay.
And so for this 4th time I was playing playing solo, I was playing it for a little bit, and then Adam came and sat down and was like, okay, what are you doing? I want to see this. And so he's sitting there with me. And as I'm I got my first artifact, I went and bought a backpack, got my second artifact, went and bought a backpack, and started to go for a 3rd artifact.
Okay.
And at that point, when I went towards the 3rd one, I might have still been able to escape, but then I decided I wanted to go for the monkey idol.
Okay.
And Adam's just looks at it and looks at me, he's like, you're being greedy. I was like, I know, but I got to get a higher score. And I ended up, so how the dragon attacks is after you purchase or defeat a monster from the dungeon row, you reveal a new card at the end of turn. And if it has a little dragon symbol on it, you initiate a dragon attack. I had 3 flip up on the same turn at maxed rage and got murdered in the depths.
Oh, wow.
I got my first official 0 turn at maxed rage and got murdered in the depths.
Oh, wow.
I got my first official 0 dying fully because I got way too greedy trying to continually beat my own score.
That is a good story. Good stuff. All right, cool. You want to wrap us up with a 2-sentence review?
Sure.
Okay.
So Clank is a mashup of 2 different genres that manages to blend the playstyles incredibly well. With more substance than it initially appears, the game will challenge its players to look at things in a different light as they plumb the depths of a dragon's dungeon.
Nice. That's some good alliteration at the end there.
Right. I was really excited when that just I was like, depths of a dragon's dungeon. That's perfect. I have to say that.
Yeah. Now say it 10 times fast. No,
it will come out messy.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the in-depth dive into. I almost said review, but it's not really a review.
Yeah.
Of Clank, yeah.
So I really enjoy Clank. I want to play it more with other people that are really kind of weighing on me about what they've decided to do and what it means, to be able to, what replayability means in general,
yeah.
Which again is kind of what I wanted to talk about for the second segment tonight.
Cool, yeah. So bring us in with your discussion question today.
So I was looking around Reddit recently, as I tend to do when I'm sitting there I don't have enough time to play a game. I want to kill a few minutes. So I'll jump on Reddit. I'll scroll through things and see if anything catches my eye.
Yeah.
And I was reading this guy talking about how he was playing through his games 5 times in a row to determine if he wanted to keep them in his collection. His idea was, if I play a game 5 times in a row, no breaks between it to play another game, and if at no point I play another round of this, the game stays in my collection. If I do think that question, I sell the game.
Wow.
And
it seems like a little bit of a harsh...
incredibly harsh. Yeah, I agree.
Especially
because people were bringing up points 5 rounds through a quick game is not the same as say you decided to do this. Think about trying to play Scythe 5 times in a row without playing another game.
Exactly.
Now, you don't have to do them all in one sitting.
Right.
It's just you don't play another game in between those 5 sessions.
I feel like what would happen there is, yeah, you'd lose a game like Scythe, and then 2 months later you'd be like, I wish I hadn't sold Scythe.
Right. And so I started kind of thinking about what it means to play a game 5 times in a row, and how another person that mentioned that they were talking about this, and they felt they had gotten to a point where they understood the game on a better, more strategic level.
Sure.
And that sounded interesting to me.
I believe that.
But I'd also then thinking about Clank, and like I said, this limited amount of extra cards, the way that they've designed the expansions, it made me think about the idea of, is there a point, and like I said, this limited amount of extra cards, the way that they've designed the expansions, it made me think about the idea of, is there a point where you can kind of reach the end game of a game? You can burn yourself out on it. And is there, like, does fully understanding the strategic depth of a game harm the longevity of it?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. So we should probably get out of the way first that there are some games which are random enough or are simple enough that you can understand them strategically like the third time you play them, right?
Right.
Like, you know, there are a lot of situational strategies in a game like Guillotine, but I understand what I'm trying to do. And I understand my approaches pretty much entirely. The difference is going to be what other people are doing and how to outwit the people at the table, right?
Right.
And there are definitely games that can be solved. I don't know exactly, but computers are doing a heck of a job beating human players.
They're trying.
And then there are definitely games that are solvable. Off the top of my head, I can't really think of any because I think that humans tend to not love games that are solvable. So actually, a couple of ideas have come to mind. Games which are largely about exploration or about their narratives can sometimes be pretty easily solved. There is, for example, an ideal way to proceed through a game like Cultist Simulator. And once you've realized what that is, the game loses a little bit of its excitement. It's still a great game, and they're releasing new content for it all the time, which is going to make its replayability last a lot longer. But solvable games, once you've solved them, yeah, they're not really that replayable anymore.
Yeah, because, like, especially now when I have limited time for things, like, I don't often want to go back.
That replayable anymore.
Yeah, because, like, especially now when I have limited time for things, like, I don't often want to go back and replay a video game that I've sunk a bunch of hours into, right? But board games are interesting because it's a multiplayer experience a lot of times, except that when I look at Clank right now, I've played it significantly more as a solo game than I have as a multiplayer game. And I've enjoyed each time that I've played through it, but it makes me wonder, especially, again, looking at Clank and its limited amount of cards and the fact that, like, it's only got so many core strategies that you can see, even once you learn all the cards. Mm-hmm. Just wondering if, will that eventually make the game less fun? And I think another article I was reading that made me think about this was on Kotaku. They ran a piece talking about a Just Dance streamer who was talking about how it's like every single day she gets up, but for streamers, taking even like a 2 or 3 day break, like a weekend break, can mean like thousands and thousands of lost subscriptions.
That's incredible.
Like they talked about in that same article, a really popular either Fortnite or PUBG streamer, I can't remember who it was, who like took a 3 or 4 day break and lost 40,000 subscriptions.
That may be a question of our cultural approach to streaming, but we could unpack that in a later episode. Right.
But the idea, though, of like they feel like forced to play this game into a point of burnout, and that's what she was going through. She's like, obviously physically getting up and dancing for hours on end every day takes its toll on your body.
Totally.
But also, like they talked about, she was, I have heard the same song hundreds of times and done the dance moves to those songs hundreds of times. I want to hear different songs.
Yeah, of course.
I have heard the same song hundreds of times and done the dance moves to those songs hundreds of times. I want to hear different songs.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we lived through the height of the Dance Dance Revolution, when they started setting up the big machines in arcades and everything. Mm-hmm. And I remember people getting really, really good at those, but also I didn't even play that much, getting annoyed with the songs people chose a lot, right? So
Because it's the same ones, and she
Yeah.
actually does a lot of times by request.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so you can imagine that just running a song into the ground for you.
Ooh. Yeah.
So I guess just this idea of burnout, when you apply it to like a strategy multiplayer based board game,
Yeah.
like there are games that I played all the time when I first got them that I just don't pull out anymore.
Yeah, I would suspect that there are a few different things operating here, and I didn't really prepare for them with. If you're playing with people who are always trying to figure out new strategies and they're always interested in, being a little bit competitive and a little bit problem solving, then I imagine games stay fresh longer. If someone gets really good at a game, to touch on the question of strategic depth, and runs away with winning like every single time, that's also going to affect my perception of fun in a game. And then I think you're right that games with more strategic depth tend to be a little bit more replayable. That doesn't mean I always want that experience, but it does mean that I always want to come back to that experience at some point. I love playing Twilight Imperium because it's got 5 different big, deep games going on, and if you're good at 3 of them, you might be able to outwit everybody else. But that doesn't mean you have to be good at all of them. I've absolutely run the table with the political side of things and just gotten crushed in war, right? And then I lost. So I imagine that a game that's deeply strategic is going to call me back more often. I play games like Stellaris and Crusader Kings on my computer a lot because they're really deep strategic experiences. And I haven't solved them yet. I've gotten better at them and I'm getting good at them, I'd like to think. But a game that is like Reigns, for example. I really enjoyed Reigns, but part of it was a problem solving or like a puzzle solving thing. And once you figure out how to balance the 4 factions and then solve the thing with the skeleton at the end, which I won't spoil here, then you have beaten the game and there's not really a lot of reason to go back to it. So a game with less strategic depth or more easily solved strategic elements,
or a single solution,
exactly, aren't going to call me back nearly as often. I've mentioned positively games like Gone Home, very narratively based. Some people don't like the quote-unquote walking simulator thing. I think that it's sort of a different animal here. I like to read novels. I don't necessarily reread the same novel unless I'm looking for a feel or a tone or a story that I want, I have some nostalgia over or something, right? But it's a different thing than reading a book for the first time. I'm probably not going to play Gone Home again in the same kind of way. I might play it.
It's impossible.
Yeah, right. I might play it to look at some of the things that I missed, the details, but I'm not going to play it for the surprise and the revelation again.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was just something I had been kicking around in my head trying to figure out for myself. Because, I still really enjoy pulling out Puerto Rico when I get the chance.
Right.
That was the very first more complicated board. Because, I still really enjoy pulling out Puerto Rico when I get the chance.
Right.
That was the very first more complicated board game I ever played. But, I haven't had the chance to pull out Small World in a long time.
Sure.
I hadn't really busted out Quarriors in a long time. And these were games that occupied hours and hours and hours of my time in college.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously I understand that I can't play the amount of games now that I did back then. But when I have time, what I gravitate to is interesting to me. And if I look at with Duel Links, I kind of burnt myself out on that game for a bit, really tryharding it. And I think it's because Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not as good of a game as something like Magic, where I have essentially been playing Magic nonstop for over a decade.
And there is something important to say about Magic, and that's that it is constantly supported. If you keep adding content to a game, then it's going to be much more added narrative content, like if they wrote a bunch of novels set in the Magic world. That might not keep me playing the game, might not even keep me reading. It depends on if I'm interested in those stories. But adding new cards that allow me to create new strategies or counter old strategies, or just in any way sort of develop the game, I think that is huge.
Yeah. I thought it was particularly interesting. One of Mark Rosewater's recent blog posts on Tumblr, someone asked, you've been doing essentially the same job for 20 years, working as a designer for Magic.
Yeah.
Sure, he's been in a development position. He's currently the head designer. He wasn't always, but he's essentially been working on designing Magic cards for 20 years. And his thing was like, I get to design different games every single day because Magic is so varied in the experiences that it creates and that it gives.
Agreed.
And so he's like designing a game like that, you could easily do it for that long. Whereas you look at other games that, you know, are longer running games and have still been out for a while, they don't have, you know, that 25-year kind of reach that Magic does.
Well, right.
And not even just because like they started after Magic, but because like, you know, they ran for a bit, they were popular, and then they died.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are lots of reasons for that. I mean, a good corollary to Magic might be something like World of Warcraft, a game which, despite its graphical limitations and everything, is still out and still running today and has been running for over a decade?
At least, I think.
People are still playing it, and part of it is that they're adding new content. They're adding new puzzles. They're adding new strategic elements. They, you know, nerf and buff things all the time, and they add, you know, PvP stuff. They add PvE stuff. Being able to continually support a game is one of the things that keeps people coming back to it. If you can't do that because, you know, you had a single big release or something, then it's going to be what the game has inside it and how it stands on its own that figure out whether or not I come back to it, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure that there's a big connection in terms of fun and people's perception of fun in a game and its strategic depth. I do find that even games that are strategically deep, I sometimes have to be in the right mood for them. I really like the game Fury of Dracula. We covered it here. I pull it out about once a year. The problem is that it's a stressful game to me. A lot of hidden information. It takes kind of a long time, and so it's a little bit of a commitment. And if I start to screw up early on, I know that that's going to affect me way down the line. So I try really hard to make every move as good as possible. And if I could not play like that, I might. And if I could not play like that, I might play it more. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense.
So maybe even as you get better at a game and you start to see where things can go wrong, that might also affect your play time.
Yeah, no, that's actually fair, because like playing Magic, I know the formats that I particularly enjoy. Like, I haven't had a drive to get back into Standard or to try and be involved in Modern for a long time, but I love limited Magic, and I like powerful formats. Like, I enjoy Vintage, but I can't afford to play it. I think I would probably like Legacy, and I really enjoy Commander. The problem being that I can't even start talking about Magic prices, or I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think it's a question that doesn't necessarily have an answer, but there are definitely strong correlations, I think, between a game having a lot of strategic depths and, like, I still play a lot of short games and have a ton of fun with them. And I think that the mindset, like you said, matters, because if I know that this is not going to be a game that's going to eat up a ton of my time, and it's not going to be something where I have to make all the right strategic decisions constantly to enjoy it, I can have fun with those and play those games a lot. Like, I can see myself playing Jump Drive for a long time, because it's got a good amount of strategy without being too overly demanding.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that there's a lot of factors that go into it, but it felt like a fun topic. So.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I suspect that part of that is to do with our lifestyles, of course, right? As we both get more busy and as we both, you know, add layers to our lives, we have less time to do
a twin layer, maybe.
Yeah, right. We have less time to do the big games and the sort of all-day sessions that we used to do. And we find a lot more fun in just enjoying the process of coming back to something that we know we love. And we find a lot more fun in just enjoying the process of coming back to something that we know we love, you know, the whole hobby, the community of gaming, and spending a little bit of time there, even if we can't, you know, take a long walk in the woods, as it were. All right. So, unless there's anything else you've got to say, I think that brings us to the end.
I think I hit on everything that I wanted to talk about. It was a cool topic. It was something that had been floating around in my head. I'm glad I got a chance to kind of parse it out with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Love our discussions. So if you're interested in chatting with us about strategic depth, replayability, what you think makes a game fun to come back to even years after you mastered it, hit us up on Twitter at playing_rough. That's the best place to find us, but you can always email us at playingroughpodcast@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Instagram or Facebook, Playing Rough Podcast at both places. Or if you are interested in supporting us, come and check us out on Patreon, where I have just soon be dropping my second short episode. We do articles every week, and hopefully we'll have some more different kinds of content coming up here soon.
I wanted to say with that, I think that I love your short episodes, and I was thinking of for my additional content like that, I think it'd be really fun to do actual like playthroughs of games.
I agree, yeah, and especially we don't need to necessarily do huge ones like we do for the Playing Rough Plays, but just a playthrough of some games that we are interested in would be awesome. So Ben has continued on with some of his columns. And he's got...
I love Ben's dry sense of humor.
So do I. So Ben is like probably the number one driver of our humorous posts. He just posted the 5 best things about returning to a video game, resuming a video game. A follow up from his 7 best things about resuming worst things about resuming a video game. And I have just dropped a monster spotlight on the Trickster. So that's where we are at. So with that, I have been John.
I've been David.
See you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
John, I'm so glad we could finally talk about your babies.
Yeah, so people have sort of accused me of just like dropping it casually in conversation. And I'm like, what do you want? Do you want me to like hand out invitations or like, anyway.
Invitations to learning that I have a child.
Yes, these are this is the big announcement, ruffians. Yep, twins. We are really, really excited.
I'm so pumped. I was telling him, I was like, we have to make sure that Charlotte is best friends with him.
Oh yeah, and actually Becky was like, Charlotte's going to be like their older, wiser friend, like that's a year older and says things like, "When I was a kid, here is how things were."
Oh my god, I can't wait.
1 is 5 and 1 is 4. Like, learn says things like, "When I was a kid, here is how things were."
Oh my god, I can't wait.
1 is 5 and 1 is 4. Like. 2 or 4. Yeah.
She is. If she's like me, she's going to be a little know-it-all too.
Well, we are really looking forward to our kids being the best of friends.
I'm so pumped. Just like when you first told me, it was so hard to just not just like explode about it because it's so much. There's so much. I've got too many emotions right now. I'm going crazy.
Yeah. Well,
I'm not the one having the twins.
Yeah, I've got a lot of emotions myself. That's true.
Oh, God.
Yep. It's going to be coming before you know it. So
it always. I don't think there's any way for it to not sneak up on you.
For sure.
But so listeners know we might record a couple of episodes into the future to make sure that when babies do decide it's their time to be here.
Yep.